So welcome everyone to today's school fees training meeting. I'm Charity Goodfellow, and with me today is Barbie Faust. And normally we would have Tamara Daly here, but she is over in Finance Committee addressing some other concerns with school fees that are coming up. And so she is, we're hoping that she'll be joining us later towards the end of the meeting so she can be here for some question and answers. Just a little, if you have comments, feel free to either in the chat. You can also raise your hand, hover over your name on the participant list. It will allow you to raise your hand, monitoring that. And then you are also welcome to unmute your mic at any time when you have a comment as well. We will be pausing throughout the training to ask for any questions, giving you time to respond. But then if there's anything that we haven't addressed throughout the training, that final Q&A session. And so we'll any of those questions at the very end. So thank you for making the time to be here today. And I know we've got some individuals still slowly joining the meeting. So we'll just go over the agenda where we have individuals coming in and then dive right into the training. So today, to start off, we plan on covering the Certificate of Compliance results. Now, this last week, each LEA was a couple annual reports with the review of the Certificate of Compliance, and that did cover your results and take some figures that we obtained from, kind of go over what that means for us and how we're looking at that information. And that is also what will desk monitoring and risk rating. Barbie will do a complete walkthrough of the information that you received. And so if you have any questions on the reports, we will give time for you to ask that. That'll be LEA. We also will be covering fee waivers. We've had some questions that are LEA specific that for multiple LEAs that we'll be addressing in the fee waiver section. And then we wanted to go over our corrective action processes and do examples of that versus our technical guidance and what happens, and clarification between those two ways that we are reaching out to you to correct any concerns that in regarding school fees. And then we will also go through requirements. So the April 1st, as well as, and then the upcoming Certificate of Compliance. So we'll cover some details on that. And then we will our question and answer session. And so feel free to comment in the chat or respond by unmuting your mic at any point in time. And looks like we still have a few more joining. So we're so grateful that you guys could all be here today. And hopefully you will get some questions answered specific to your LEA. So is the Certificate of Compliance results. So this last October, LEA was asked to submit their Certificate of Compliance with the statistical data, and that's what we kind of wanted to go over. We also pulled information from UTREX to do our calculations. One of the numbers that we obtained from UTREX was for student counts. And so that total amount was the 667,578. And we did pull that for the same frame that the information for the statistical report was submitted to us. So all these numbers that I'm providing are for the 1920 school year. From UTREX, the full student count, we also looked at their secondary population. Now, we looked at the secondary population because that is where the majority of fees are charged. We understand that there are some elementary schools that also charge fees for after-school activity. But we found that the number of students that participate in that is considered immaterial, not affect our analysis. And so as we're looking at these numbers, these are the student populations that we will be reviewing, so you are aware. For the Certificate of Compliance, we found that there were 122 LEAs that self-reported that they charge fees. 32 of those LEA of the 156 LEAs stated that they don't charge fees, and then we had 2 that did not submit the Certificate of Compliance. Of the 32 LEAs that don't charge fees, we went back through, did a review. We looked at their websites, their Facebook accounts, and student handbooks. that there are some that actually do charge fees, that within their systems, we found notices on their, whether it was through their website, their Facebook account, that item considered a fee that's assessed to students. And we will be working individually with these LEAs to bring them into compliance. This next October, we have an accurate reporting of all schools and LEAs that do charge fees. Number we looked at was the economically disadvantaged numbers that were reported on UTREX as well. So you may understand the economically disadvantaged covers, when it's reported through UTREX, they have the counts for the free lunch and the reduced, as well as there's an economically disadvantaged category. We only looked at those for the free lunch. And so with that, and then the economically disadvantaged for those LEAs that do not have a free lunch program. And found that there were 82,232 students that are eligible for fee waivers, 27% of this total student count population. And then we reviewed the amount that was reported of compliance by each LEA as to how many students are receiving fee waivers. And that number was the 50,923. And so that would be 62%. So we have this number right here is how many were eligible. We reviewed this 50,923. And so the 62% is how many of this eligible population were actually receiving fee waivers. And so that gives us of what we're looking at, of those that are eligible for the free lunch are considered the economically disadvantaged, as to are accessing the fee waivers and being able to have those fees waived. Are there any questions regarding these numbers right now? Okay, so the first question we can ask, why does the court injunction, the permanent injunction, code and rule require that we monitor and evaluate these? And the certificate of compliance requirements are measurements or evidence of efforts to remove barriers from a student's full participation in an activity, course, or program. And so we need to have something that we can measure to show that we're improving the students' access to all these programs. And this includes all students, not just those that are eligible for fee waivers. So even those that would not be considered eligible by an income requirement, do those still have access to the programs that are available to them that is offered by each LEA? And the certificate of compliance and the statistical data provides us that information that we can measure from year to year. The upcoming slides that we have here are tables and graphs that were reported to the Legislative Public Education Appropriations Committee in November. And so with this, we looked at, on this first table here, we looked at what was reported in the audit. And this is what started the whole process of changing school fees to get to where we are today. And then we compared with the last 2 years from where we have been training and providing technical assistance and moving to the online Qualtrics system. And so with that, we are seeing a significant improvement of those that are submitting the certificate of compliance. On the audit, they reported that only 46% of LEAs submitted that compliance. And this last year, we were at 99%. So we only had 2 LEAs that did not submit that information. Another item that we want to look at is the notices parents that were sent to parents by each LEA. So this is the notification with the fee schedule and spend plans and notices of fee waivers and fee waiver applications. And so in the audit, there was 10% that were notified. 10% of the LEAs notified parents of this. We have now, it was self-reported that all LEAs that submitted the certificate of compliance did send that notification to parents. And so you are all doing a tremendous job in improving your processes and making sure that parents are notified and aware of the fees that are being charged and what those amounts are going to, helping them to understand what access their students have, and if they are in a different economic situation, the availability of fee waivers. So we appreciate all of your efforts in moving to this place that we are at now. And we are excited for the changes that are coming and seeing even further as we move forward. One last item I want to have us look at on this table is down here at the bottom. This number is reviewing the number of students that were granted fee waivers. So if you remember the numbers on the last page, this 8%, if we take that 50,000 into our total student population, this is what that 8% refers to, is we're looking at the number of students that were granted fee waivers compared to our total population. And that's where we're finding 8%. Now there is a difference here, and we tie that into, in the school year 2020, we did 82% submission rate. So there were a lot that we did not receive information for, whereas this last year, we have a lot more data coming in that we can review and say is more accurate. The number we will be looking at and going off of when we talk to the number of students. As we progress in the slides, we will refer to granted fee waivers, and sometimes we'll be referring to the amount versus the number of students. So please be aware of that as we move forward. One thing that I do want to make a point here is the information that is submitted on this statistical report we will be using on our year-to-year monitoring. And so we will be looking back at these points in time and reviewing where each LEA is at. And so it is so vital for us to have this accurate data that we can look at and monitor, and that each LEA can use to see where you are at compared to the state as a whole, and how we can work together to move to where we want to be at. These slides here, I'm going to walk through each one of the graphs and kind of explain what we are looking at with the information that's reported. So we went back to 2012 and looked at the certificate of compliance numbers that were submitted there and did a year-by-year comparison. Now, if you'll notice, the school year 2018 was not on this because it was not required for that information to be submitted that year. And so on these are just the information that we had available. This first graph refers to the total amount of charged fees versus the total amount that was waived. And we are noticing that the total amounts that are charged, so the overall fees assessed to each student, has increased each year. Again, 2019, we had only 82% submitted. So that's why we believe that that number is lower, is because we didn't have the full data we needed. With that, we would expect to see an increase in the number of fees that were waived as fees go up. We did not. We actually saw that there was a downward trend happening. So as fees increased, the amount of granted fee waivers decreased. And we're finding that there was about 8 to 12% of the total amount of fees charged were waived. This next graph is the secondary students so you have the blue here is the full that are not eligible for fee waivers. The orange is those that are eligible and participating, and the gray is those that are not participating. So that goes back to our number with UTREX of those, and it is our best estimate that we have at this time to determine who is eligible for fee waivers. And so based off of this, we are finding that from 2012 to this last report, that the number of students not participating in fee waivers who are eligible has actually increased. And so those that could be participating in fee waivers, we are finding a higher amount of students that have not been accessing that. And so that is another number that we look at to move into our next monitoring process, and coming to each LEA and asking them, where are you at? How can we improve the process? Are we addressing the challenges that we are facing with reaching these students and making sure that they have access to these? And so these will be areas that we'll be looking at as we move forward in our on-site monitoring and risk evaluation. This next graph here is, we wanted to look at the individual amounts per student. And so we looked at how much an individual student is being charged compared to the amount that is being waived. And so we found that the amount has increased per student over the years, but the amount that has been waived per student has actually stayed at 50%. And so this number should be an indicator to the LEAs to perform a self-analysis to improve participation of all students. And so this is where each LEA can look and review their processes and find out, okay, where do we sit in regards to this? So these numbers are with the state as a whole. One thing I do want to point out is there may be some minor differences between these graphs and then the annual reports that you received. What happened is, as I stated, this information was reported to the Legislation Public Education Appropriations Committee. And since that time, we have been able to go through and do some one-on-one evaluation. And so there have been some LEAs that we reached out to that we had questions on the data that was submitted, and we had a bunch. And so if there are differences between what you're seeing here and on your annual report, is because we have updated that information, and the numbers that are found on your annual report are the most up-to-date numbers. This next graph is the student maximum amounts by LEA. So we just wanted to bring attention to that, as this is a new requirement that started this last year, where each LEA had to set a maximum amount that each student, they would not pay more than that maximum amount. And so we have our minimum, our max, and then what the average is across the state. Now, all of these numbers are self-reported, and the student maximum did come from the injunction and will be going forward with the R277407. With that, are there any that have questions regarding these graphs or the table that I just covered? Okay, I do.
Real quick question.
Yes.
We're wondering if we're going to have access to these slides. You might have mentioned that earlier, but we got on just a little bit late.
You're good. Yes, this training is being recorded, and there will be posted the actual training on the website, as well as a PDF of the slides. So you will have access to all the information that we cover today and can use this training to share with any of those that were unable to attend to help with any changes that need to be made or any questions that you may have specific to your LEA. But yes, it will be available on the website.
Perfect, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Okay, then with that, I will turn the time over to Barbie to cover our desk monitoring and risk rating.
All right, great. Thank you, Charity. That went by fast. I didn't realize it was, that's my turn. Right. Wanted to reiterate, on Tuesday, we did send out the annual reports to the LEAs. Those went to the superintendent or charter director, the business administrator, and the school fee contact. So if you're a principal, you would not have seen these unless your LEA shared that with you. And just to clear up a couple of mistakes that we found in the email, most were sent, and we apologize for the error. The email stated that the state average cost per student was $392. It should read $258. The reports have the correct dollar amount, but the email was wrong. So we just want to make sure that we did see that error, and we wanted to bring it to your attention that it was wrong. Also, the email stated that the survey questions were attached. Excuse me. And they weren't for most people. We missed that one. So if you need a copy of the survey questions, please let us know, or you could probably find them on the web page. A copy of the survey questions are there from last year. The reason that we're providing the survey questions was that on the certificate of compliance report, the headers, they're very shortened. It's maybe 1 or 2 words. And so we felt that if you had the questions, it would bring, a full context to what was asked, because just the word fundraising may not give you the full gist of what was answered to the question that was answered. So with that, also, like Charity said, these reports, we feel that these should be used by the LEAs for a self-assessment tool. Obviously, we are not going to do on-site monitoring with everybody, but we kind of feel like each LEA will hopefully use these reports to be their own monitor to see how they're doing and make improvements where they see the need. So with that, will you give me the next slide, Charity? Okay, the first report that we're going to go over is the results from the certificate of compliance. in years past, the LEA would gather all of the certificates of compliance from the principals so they could see the principals, how they had answered it. Although there wasn't as many questions, it was all one big question. But we felt that it was really important for the LEAs to have a clear, full picture of what their principals and board had answered to the certificate of compliance. So this report just provides a quick view of each response submitted by the superintendent. And the superintendent is under the LEA because they're answering it for the district or charter as a whole. The board chair and each individual principal. We just listed the elementary or high schools, the schools' names here on the left. This is so that the LEAs, like I said, if you use this as a self-assessment tool, you could use this to tailor your training with your school fee staff so that you can see maybe where the is lacking and be able to provide training to a specific school or to everybody. And to further explain, the school fees team conducted a risk assessment of the certificate of compliance questions. We rated each question for impact and likelihood of non-compliance. If an LEA was not compliant to a specific requirement, how significant would the impact be to the individual student's participation? And how likely is it the LEA to be non-compliant? We then determined that the 5 questions with the most significant risk to students would be used as part of an overall risk assessment, and we'll discuss that in the risk assessment report. But these questions here are identified in the red text at the top, so you can see which questions were rated to have a higher impact. And then the answers, all the answers that are answered no are either in yellow or in red fill. The red fill are for the questions that we considered most significant or will be used on the risk assessment. So you can see that this fictitious school that we created has a lot of reds and yellows. So we're going to look at this Wilson district, and you can see that my screen just kind of.
Sorry, I was trying to zoom into it.
Oh,
it
was you? I was like, oh, my eyes. Freaking me out, Charity. Freaking me out. Okay, so you can also see that there is some differences between like the board chair and the LEA. And as an LEA, I would look at this and see, why is there differences between them? What's happening at the administration or their knowledge base versus the principals. And so this could perhaps be a place that more training is needed, maybe better communication. But this is just a tool for you to see how everybody answered. Next slide, please. Actually, I should ask, does anybody have any questions concerning the certificate of compliance?
Barbie, this is Frank Schofield in Logan District. Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
On the previous slide, thank you. Can we look at the previous slide for a second? So if you could just clarify for me the questions that are marked in red. I know on our certificate of compliance, for example, our answers were yes, but those questions were still marked in red. Is that something that we need to be concerned about?
You mean the header at the top?
The header at the top, yes.
No, that just indicates that those were the questions that we had posed as having significant risk.
Okay, I apologize if I was taking notes and missed that. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, you're fine. And then if it's in red fill, it's a significant question that was answered no, which means it's not in compliance. And then the yellow fill is still an important question. And I mean, they're compliance, so all compliance is important. This isn't part of the risk analysis that we did.
All right, thank you so much.
Just to point out, if a school answered no, they do not charge fees, then these questions that don't have a yes or a no, the reason that they're blank is because they did not see those questions. So there wasn't an answer. So if you see a blank, it just means it was not answered yes or no. Any other questions?
There's one that came in, but I think we'll address that later in the training. So Devin Daly, I will just read the question here. She said, I'm curious how the monitoring will be handled when district and school staff are not legally allowed to access the free lunch information. The districts provide the information to the parents on fee waivers in multiple ways, but we can't target those who would qualify because of those federal protections in place. Can you explain how your monitoring visits will work when that data is not accessible to schools?
Yeah, we'll be covering that a little bit later on when we talk about waivers and direct certification. So next slide. Okay, the next few slides we're talking about statistical data, and Charity gave you a trend. They gave from 2012 to 2020. When we are looking just at this last year of the data that was sent, and we're comparing the statewide data with the right. So excuse me, lost my train of thought. Wave charged, the numbers on the left side of the report are the statewide numbers. And you can see in this slide that the fees charged overall for the entire state were just over 78 million. They waived 9% or just over 7 million. So this is the statewide number, but in comparison for this particular district, Wilson District had 88,674 that they charged in fees. They waived just over 7,000, which was 8%. So if you compare these two numbers, the 8 and 9%, they're fairly close. This wouldn't cause a red flag for us. We would look at that and say, yep, they're in line with the rest of the state. They're, not terribly high and not terribly low. They're with the state average. Then the next table here, we have state average charged versus the waived. Excuse me. State average charge is $258. In this scenario of Wilson District, they have $184. The state average waived per student is $139. And again, you can see that this is 54%, like Charity said, is about where it stayed the trend. But in this scenario, Wilson District waived 162. So they're much closer. They're waiving 88% of the charged fees. So what does this mean? A larger than expected difference between the amount charged per student and the amount waived per student could be an indication that the waiver students aren't participating at the same level as the paid students. Perhaps they don't know that they can participate in the extracurricular or higher cost activities, and that the fees would be waived for those. So this would be something that an LEA would look at and say, why are our percentages, we are much lower than the average, or could we do better? Next slide, please. Or let's stop. Any questions? Anybody have any questions on these two tables? Go ahead and you can just unmute and ask your question if that's the easiest. And looks like we don't.
There is one that came in with the chat.
Okay.
Goal be to have the two numbers match more closely.
What was that?
Would the goal be to have the two numbers match more closely?
I would say yes. It's never going to be exact, but I would think that you'd like to see them a little bit closer. 54%, that's a pretty big difference, that your waiver students are only getting, participating 54% of possibly what the paid students are. It's something that you would look at and say, why are they not participating at the same level? I mean, we've heard that these kids, they don't participate in the same types of activities. Well, that may be true, but it also would be like, well, why aren't they? What can we do to make sure that they know they can participate? That was part of the injunction, is the extracurricular was proven. That's why they say you have to waive it. It's such a part of the school experience, and even going into college, it's part of your application process. They like to see that. It helps people get into better schools. And so I would just say, yeah, you'd probably to the charged amount. Anything else?
Yes, there's another one. How does this take into account different demographics among LEAs?
You know, this is something that Tammy and I talked about, and Charity, right now, this is just statewide. And we do have the capability of looking at rural versus urban versus district, you know, and separating that into charters and districts in a rural setting. Or so right now this is just statewide, but we are looking at trying to stratify that number, because we realize it is not the same across the board. The state average for the entire state would be different from what a rural district is. And so this is just a starting point. This is the first year that they've analyzed it to this detail. And going forward, excuse me, my voice, going forward, we're hoping to get more information out to you. And if there's something in particular that you would like to see, please let us know. We don't know what you need. And if you need to have a particular statistical data, let us know, and we'll be happy to provide that for you.
Another question came in. So is this Wilson School District, the example here, doing better or worse than the state average?
Looking at this, in my opinion, I would say they're doing better. They're serving more of the eligible students, and the disparity between the charged and the waived is not as great as you would see on the state. Would you agree, Charity?
Yes, yes,
She's been doing this longer than I have.
So, and that's kind of one of the things is that when we're looking at these amounts, you have the average charge per student, and we want to make sure that all those fees are being waived for the students. And so when we're looking at these amounts and these percentages, the closer we can get to 100%, the more we know we're headed in the right direction. And so that's where we're looking at the state overall as a whole. And right now we're around that 50%. And so it's moving to get that on a per student basis, those fees are being waived when a student is on fee waiver. And so it can vary, but if we can be moving in the correct direction, that's the goal that we're aiming for.
Yeah, she would know. An encyclopedia when it comes to school fees. Any other questions, Charity?
I'm not seeing any more coming in.
Okay, great. Okay, the next set of tables, I know there's a lot of information here, and most of it is like background information, so you can see how we came up with the number, because it's not an exact, it is an estimate. We received an email earlier. Somebody had commented that our estimated number of economically disadvantaged, or people that were students that were eligible for fee waivers, was different than what it was. Well, we want to make sure that you realize how we came up with this estimate. Like Charity said, in UTREX, they have economically disadvantaged, and not all schools participate in the National School Lunch. Generally, it is free, reduced, and economically disadvantaged. But if they don't participate in free National School Lunch, then they can just put in why. They've taken an application and determined that the student is low income, but they don't have, it's not for free lunch. And they can report that. It's used for funding for other programs. Not exactly sure what programs, but they do collect that. And we felt like this was the best estimate to determine who was eligible, because guidelines for fee waivers matches that of the free lunch. And we do realize that the economically disadvantaged had a reduced free price lunch. We excluded that. We took it out of our calculation. So we were just looking at free lunch students, those that had been determined economically disadvantaged, and added those together. So in this scenario, Wilson District, they have a secondary enrollment of 481 students. And this was number that we got out of UTREX. We took grades 7 through 12 only. And we know that some 6th graders may be included in your secondary, but again, this is just an estimate. We weren't going to go school by school and determine exact who was eligible. So in this scenario, 481 secondary students, and based on the district's overall economically disadvantaged number of 13%, we estimated that 61 of the economically disadvantaged were eligible for, or, excuse me, 61 of the 307 secondary students. Okay, we're going to back up. See, this is confusing. They have 481 students of secondary students, of which 13% of those secondary students were eligible for fee waivers. That's the 13%. That leaves, and however, they only granted 44 of the 61. This leaves 17 students, or 28% of the 61, not participating in the fee waiver. The state average is 38%. So this district, this Wilson district, is actually serving more of the students than the state. This is kind of you're looking at who's not getting it. So you want it to be a lower number instead of a higher number. People that are not on fee waivers, you want to get that down as close to 0 as possible. So the district is doing better than the state average at granting fee waivers for eligible students. They may want to possibly do an outreach to parents of students that have fees, or work with the child nutrition program to help get the word out, qualifies for free lunch, that they could also qualify for fee waivers. I actually saw a notice on a district's child nutrition program website that gave a notice to parents about fee waivers. It wasn't saying, you're automatically approved, but if you are on free lunch, here's the link for fee waivers. So it did give them a bridge to automatically sign up for fee waivers. So I thought that was a nice customer service. Okay, so I know you probably have questions. Let's open it up. Does anybody have questions on the estimated statistical data analysis?
Nothing in the chat right now, Barbie.
Okay. Even with my bumbling.
You're doing great.
All right, let's do the next slide. Okay, so now we've looked at Wilson's district's compliance and we've looked at their statistical data. We bring these two reports together, determine an overall risk score. This is how we are monitoring. We'll run this risk and look at these factors and then bring it back and determine who may need further review. So in the case of Wilson District, they did really well on the statistical data. The LEA's average was below the state, so they didn't get any risk points there. The average cost, the reason that we look at this is the average cost can affect the participation of a non-waiver student, even though whose family doesn't qualify for waivers, but can't afford the average fee. So we want to make sure that the average cost isn't exorbitantly high, because a family with 3 or 4 children may find it difficult to pay a $300 or $400 fee for each student, even though it may be below the state average, even, $200. It may be a stretch for somebody that has a lot of children. So we just want to make sure that our averages stay in a reasonable range. Now, the next block here is the percent of students not participating. Wilson's district had 28%, so they didn't receive any risk points for their state average. They were doing well. The state average was 38%, but we set the threshold at 45, which is a little bit higher. We'd like to bring that down, but we're kind of going to ease into it and not set it low, because this is really the purpose of school fee waivers. It was weighted heavier than the average cost per student, because that is the whole reason behind school fees, and the monitoring is to make sure that the equity for children that of economically disadvantaged are receiving fee waivers and are participating at the level that paid students are. But we realize too that if you miss this percentage, it gives you 3 points, but automatically would put that LEA into a moderate risk. So if they were to get a point in anything else, it would put them in a high. So you can see that is a weighted quite heavily. So we want to make sure that you're aware that you want to bring that into compliance or into a reasonable area as soon as possible. The next block is school fee calls. The school fees team maintains a phone line that anyone can call asking for assistance or to file a complaint concerning school fees. We only counted calls that were received from parents, because we felt that that was an indication that there was a potential problem at the district. Most of the calls that are received on the school fees line are from schools and administration, and they weren't included in the matrix. Then we come to the compliance results. Well, this is where poor Miss Wilson district just fell apart. They were not doing as well. Their statistical numbers indicated they were doing a good job at administering school fees, but their assurance of compliance is where they're having their biggest issues. For the 5 questions that we were determined to pose the most significant risk to students, the risk points were assessed 1 point for each question for the superintendent or charter director, and 1 point for the board chair. This is part of their internal control system, and leadership really sets the tone at the top or the standards for the rest of the LEA. If the leadership doesn't know what to do, how can they expect that their schools know what the requirements are? So this is why it's weighted pretty heavily. We expect that the LEA and the board chair should know the rules and know the answers to the questions that are asked. The principals, they were assessed 0.2 for each of the 5 questions. The more schools that LEA has, the greater the risk of non-compliance. So obviously, if they have 20 schools, I mean, the risk goes up versus if you have just 1 school. Because that, I mean, it's just everybody knows that you have more schools, it is more work because you have to monitor more individuals and more processes. So in this scenario, Wilson School District's overall risk score is 6.8, which is considered high. So if an LEA receives a high risk score, they could potentially receive an on-site review in school year 2022. We're not doing any this year, and with COVID, hopefully, we'll be back to somewhat normal here soon, and that we could potentially be doing on-site reviews next year. The on-site reviews will entail a closer look at the LEA's policies, the registration process, the accounting of fees and fee waivers. And then once an on-site review is done, if we come out and determine that there is bigger problems, then a corrective action could be warranted, or it could just be technical guidance. So that's kind of what the 3 reports were. If you did not get a statistical data report, it was either because you don't charge fees and you reported that as such. And if you didn't say you don't charge fees, the questions, the LEA did not provide that data, so there wasn't any data to analyze. And there was also 8 schools that have only elementary. And because the analysis was done on secondary schools, we would not have a statistical data report either. You could use the same process and do that for your elementary schools, for your after-school programs, but it hit so few schools or so few students, we didn't, there was no way to pull the data individual schools that have only elementary. So any other questions?
Barbie,
Yes.
this is Ron Nielsen, Superintendent, San Juan School District, and I'm a little confused on my individual LEA report. I pulled up a copy of the numbers we submitted at the end of the year, and I still have that report, but those numbers do not match the numbers that are in this report that I have in my risk assessment. For instance, it doesn't even say how many students are eligible in my LEA, but we did give that amount. So
Do you know what? You are a unique situation. You are a district that has CEP, which is Community Eligibility Program for your child nutrition.
Mhm.
I think your numbers in UTREX are a little skewed. So, you know,
Okay,
yes, why don't you give us a call?
okay, we can work on that
We
individually.
can work on it.
Thank you.
Because yes, I
Very good.
remember seeing yours and I'm thinking, San Juan's is a little, they have a unique situation. So
Thank you.
you're welcome.
There is a question that just came in, Barbie.
Yes.
The maximum amount for average cost based on the spend plans or the actual fees that were collected?
What was, I missed that. You
So,
cut.
sorry, are you using the maximum amount for average cost based on the spend plans or the actual fees that were collected?
Actual fees collected. We didn't look at the spend plans. Do you have any other questions?
That's the only other one so far coming in through the chat. I don't know if anybody else has any others.
Can I speak? I did type in the chat a little while ago. I'm just wondering why we're so focused on free lunch percentage and trying to tie that to the exact fee waiver percentage when the two processes are completely different as far as the burden of proof goes with income verification. School lunch is pretty much you submit it and you're in, with not a lot of income verification happening. Fee waivers, we are allowed to require income documentation. So you can have a parent that applies for school lunch that won't apply for fee waivers just because the burden of proof is completely different.
You are correct. And this, the economically disadvantaged that we used is just a baseline. It's the only number that we have that determines potential, and it is just an estimate. It's not an exact by any means. It's just an estimate that we can use to just kind of gauge where we think you should be. I mean, if you come back and it's like, this is really way off, because our secondary schools, our population, we only have 10%, but our elementary schools, we have 15% that are eligible. So it is just a guideline. It's not an exact.
And I could speak up, Charity. You guys hear me?
Yeah,
oh,
we can hear you,
Tammy's with
Tammy.
us.
Yes, she's
Yeah,
back.
Tammy's here, and I actually put a response in the chat in that. But we know we're looking. We want these performance metrics just to be kind of a a gauge. These first numbers are really rough because they're self-reported, we haven't audited, and there's so much noise in them. But as we get better at collecting them and understanding the metrics or the numbers we want, we can look for that to be trends going forward. We're looking for the trend of better, more of the eligible students participating, the cost of the fee, the average cost coming between fee waiver, non-fee waiver coming together. Because what each, and I put in the chat also that the benchmarks we use, we're using state right now just as a default. But eventually, as we start looking at this and kind of doing some asking, why is it this number? Why is it this way? That might become a regional or an LEA number, not a statewide benchmark. But we want to have an understanding. And this is just kind of our point in sand right now, and that's in sand. And then we want to move to the direction of a greater compliance. Again, performance metrics, these are just kind of give us this high level overview of what's going on and what's happening with school fees.
So there's a couple of questions that have come up too. Thanks, Tammy and Barbie. I do want to point out some things. Some of you, when you're asking that actual cost, I want to make some clarifications. So when we're talking about the state average cost per student, what we've done is we've taken the total amounts that were charged in fees divided by that total student population, and that gives us the cost per student that we're looking at. So the spend plans, those are self-reported amounts. And so I want you to make sure that you recognize the difference when we're looking at these and how we've calculated these figures. And so when the spend plans are completely separate and are not tied into this risk assessment score here. And so that's where we're saying we're using actual numbers, is that we have come by these through those reports of here's our total student population, here's what we are getting that is reported for the amount that is being charged for school fees, and then calculating that cost per student receiving that. And so it's making sure that we're looking at these accurately and all understanding where we're coming from. In a minute, I'm going to address a little bit more about the fee waiver question, the free lunch that you guys keep asking. And so I will go into a lot more detail with the requirements on that as well. Do we have any more specific questions regarding this risk assessment score and the data that we are looking at?
Brian asked a question. Is there any consideration as to whether the call received from the parent on the hotline has validity before it is included as a risk factor for a district? And the answer would be yes. It is. We do an analysis, we do a monitor, we collect that data and determine whether or not it has merit, or if it was just a misunderstanding or something like that. So.
Thank you, Barbie.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we are going to go ahead. Sorry, one more question, but it is still a code if a parent calls, is what they're asking. So yes, so we go through our call log and we flag those by parents, and then we evaluate those. So one thing that we are looking at is how many calls are being received for that LEA from year to year. And what you can do is basically, one of the questions that we had that came in is we reported our numbers that there were 3 calls that came in to the state board for us. The LEA on their end only recorded that they had 1 that was received. And so with that, they reached out to us to verify the information, what was happening. And so these numbers are kind of a, hey, where do we need to improve the communication? What is happening? Do we need to reach, are we on the state board side not communicating with you enough? Or have you gone through, you've received the information, you know exactly which calls those 3 were and you have addressed? If they are, then there's no concern on that. And so it is an evaluation that will happen from year to year, and we will just go through and make sure that we are all on the same page, we're understanding what is happening. And if those calls have all been addressed and the LEA no longer is getting those same concerns from year to year, then there's not that same risk. Any other questions? Thanks, Tammy. So yeah, if we get a parent that comes in and they just have technical help, hey, I need help with that, that's not included. It's if it's a concern that has come up. So, okay, moving on to fee waivers. So we will get to your questions that you keep asking. There's a couple things I wanted to cover first. Here's the requirement in R277 that a waiver is a full release from the of payment of a fee. So when a student is approved for a fee waiver, that means all fees should be waived. With that, each LEA is required to set up their own policies. You have the requirements that are established in code and board rule, and then those that you have leeway to establish for your LEA. What works best for your LEA? So some things that are required with code and rule are you have to notify parents of fee waivers. So when you send out those registration materials, that should be in a policy. If parents will be notified that if their income qualifies, they can apply for fee waivers. The next is eligibility and documentation requirements. And so when a family applies for fee waivers, what documentation are you requesting of them? And a lot of that is listed on the school fees website. And so I know there are some that have linked to the school fees website, and those that have, I would say, please make sure that those links are updated, because we have the old website that I think it was law and policy on the USBU website. There are still some schools that are linked to that, and the school fees now we have our own website that has the forms and the applications. And so please make sure that your websites are updated if you are linking, or that documentation requirement, the eligibility, is available on your website, so parents know exactly if they are eligible and what information they would need to provide when they submit that application. That should be in your policy. You also need to establish a designated school fee administrator at each school. And so every school should have who that is written in their policies. When a parent pulls it up, they look at fee waivers, they know exactly who they would contact or submit those applications to. There are a lot of times that we will get emails from parents just saying, hey, here's my fee waiver. What do I need to do further? And so they should already have that information written in your policies that are sent to them as to who they need to contact when they are submitting those applications. You also need to have a confidentiality disclosure. State that only those who need to know will know. So teachers, coaches, other staff do not need to know who is on fee waivers or who has applied for fee waivers. Only your designated school fee administrator, or if you have another individual that is involved in the school fee process, those are the only individuals that should know which students are on fee waivers. And you should have that specifically within your policies. The last thing that is required is you cannot place unreasonable demands on a family when applying for fee waivers. So you have the eligibility requirements outlined in board and rule, but if there's a situation that falls outside of those eligibilities and a family is applying for fee waivers, you cannot ask ridiculous amounts of verification from them to prove that they are eligible for fee waivers. You would work with those families to get the accurate information to show that, but it should not be excessive. So when looking at the areas that you have some degree of leeway to look at your own policies, there's a couple areas that you must discuss as your LEA. How are we going to handle those families that fall above the minimum requirements set in board and rule? So if they do not qualify income-wise, they're not on TANF, they're not in state custody, but this family has a situation where they need help with fee waivers. What is your process for handling that and reviewing that? Do you have the individual, is that designated as your school fee administrator? Do they, where would they submit that? And at what point can they know what requirements you may consider? Or is it just in your policy you have, we will review any of those that sit outside of these minimum requirements on a case by case? Please meet with this administrator if you have questions regarding your personal situation, but that should be in your policy. Another is eligibility changes. What happens when you have a family at the beginning of the year? They can pay for fees, and then partway through the year, they are no longer able to meet that, and they need assistance with the fee waivers. What are your policies and procedures in helping out those families? So do you have a time frame where they can submit the fee waivers? And a family should be able to submit fee waivers anytime that eligibility changes, an application for fee waivers. The other question that has been presented to us is what happens with those that did not apply for fee waivers at the beginning of the year, even though they may have been eligible, and then submit partway through the year. That is up to LEA policy. State law just states that once that application has been submitted and approved, then from that point forward, you waive the fees. But you have to determine what works best for your LEA when looking at backdating waivers or with those eligibility changes. Are you seeing more success when it's being sent to a third party and collecting, or do those families, they just can't pay those fees? And so you are backdating waivers to cover those amounts that they have not been able to pay. What works for your LEA? You need to establish those processes and have them in a policy so that a family is aware of how that would work. Your denial and appeals processes. What happens when a family submits and they were denied? What process can they go through? Who do they send the forms to? Where do they find the forms to submit for that denial and appeal? And so that should be with your fee waiver policies specific to your LEA. This last one is the direct certification disclosure processes. Now, I know you guys have a lot of questions regarding the free lunch. And so that's where we're going to dive into this right now. So please, if you have questions, feel free to unmute your mic or put it in the chat. I will try to watch that since a lot of you have questions regarding this specifically. What I want to clarify to begin here is we are looking at the free lunch eligibility as a way to increase outreach to those that are eligible for free lunch, okay? So the fee waiver income that is stated within the application matches that of free lunch income. So we pulled those income amounts directly from the CNP, the Child Nutrition Program site, when we put out these numbers. And so those will be updated this upcoming month because it's around March 20th when the USDA releases those updated numbers for the next year. And so this is where we're looking when we say that the free lunch is a great way to look at fee waiver eligibility, is because the income matches that of what qualifies a family for free lunch. Now, I want to go through and clarify the processes for free lunch. There are the federal requirements that are specific into sharing data between programs. So the Child Nutrition Program has stated that you cannot share this information unless you have a parental disclosure request from them. And so you need to have a process set up if your LEA chooses to use this as a way to reach out to those families that are eligible for free lunch. You need to set up what your processes are and have this in policy. On our model policy, we have the exact language from the manual that the Child Nutrition Program has, that 7 CFR 245.6. Down at the bottom of the screen here, you can see where we've notated that manual where they have this parental disclosure request. That is also within the model policy on the website. They require that you have a statement stating that the parent is not required to consent to disclose the information between the free lunch and the fee waiver. Any information obtained will be used to facilitate enrollment of eligible students for fee waivers. And if they agree, it will not affect, if they sign this parental disclosure request, it will not affect their students' eligibility for free or reduced lunch. Those are the federal requirements that the Child Nutrition Program has outlined that you have to abide by if you are sharing the free lunch certification with the fee waiver program. You have to get this parental disclosure request from the family. Now, there are two ways that a family can apply for free lunch. The first one is through direct certification. This is where a school receives notification from the state that a family qualifies. So most of you should have someone within your schools or your LEAs that receives that direct certification. These are families who have gone in specifically to the state and applied for TANF, SNAP, food stamps, where they have gone through a rigorous verification process of their income with the state. So when this direct certification notification is received, these families qualify under that income, and they have submitted that. And this, if you receive that from the state and you get a parental disclosure request signed by a parent, you do not need additional documentation to verify eligibility, because that has already been received by the state and is verified through that direct certification list. Now you have the other process where a family can go on to the website and fill out a free lunch application. They do not submit any type of verification of income. They just state, hey, yes, our income qualifies. You do need to list and have this parental disclosure request on the website to share that information. If you receive a signature from a parent through this process where they've gone online and filled it out, you may then reach out to the family and request additional documentation to verify their income. So we have these two different ways that are tied to the free lunch income eligibility. Are there any questions?
Yes, question. It's not just for me, but I know there's some other folks that have other entities that are providing their lunch, or that they sign up with another entity for their free and reduced lunch, and it's delivered to our school. Is there any way to have that application on our website rather than the website of the person delivering the lunches?
So just to clarify, you have a third-party entity that is bringing in lunches for all the students. And so you're asking if there's the application, if you can have that posted on your website for the parental disclosure request. Is that correct?
Correct. So it's another school. So all of a sudden I can't get access to the data.
Okay, because they're
applying with another school, even though they're providing the lunches to us.
okay, so the direct certification is going to this other school. Okay.
Correct.
Okay, so what you can do is have a notification on your website to families stating that if they qualify for free lunch, they may qualify for fee waivers. And then state that they can have this parental disclosure request. And so that's where you can put that to all your families within your schools, notify them. You can even send that type of a notification with your registration materials.
If I could speak up, we could work with you, Brett, on this offline, but I think it comes down to, again, that parental disclosure request on that school's that you're getting it from would have to include an authorization to share it with you, Ames, through the program. But we need to go work with the school lunch people to get that exact, how that would work exactly. But we'd be happy to help you facilitate that. So.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And we have reached out to DWS as well and are trying to work with them to figure out a good way to have this parental disclosure request available even through DWS. So, and we have done some training with them as well so that they can notify the families that they are working with to get this. It looks like there's a couple questions. Heidi, you were under the impression that we are not able to share what program our families qualified under. And so you are just sending out, so you're not sharing the program that you qualified under, you're asking for a disclosure request. And if they agree, so within the free lunch, you would have that on that application. If then they agree to disclose that information, you can then share it with the fee waiver program. Just answer the question.
Sorry, one more question.
Sure.
If we were to work out a sharing agreement, it would be at the district level, but would it have to go? Would it be at the superintendent, assistant superintendent level, or would it be through nutrition services for the sharing of that information?
It would most likely run through the nutrition services because it has to come, you have to get that disclosure request from that program.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Yes, you can include the parental disclosure request in the fee waiver packet. So you can send that notification to families of if they qualify for free lunch under income, they may also qualify for fee waivers. But again, list those items on there. And if they agree to that, you have that signature to share that information between programs. Any other questions? Okay, so this is, like I said, this information is available on our model policy. I believe it's page 15 of the model policy when we talk about the options that the LEA has to use this as a way to reach out to those that already qualify for free lunch. But that is the federal requirement and how you can share that information between those. Okay, if we don't have any questions specific to this, I will move on to the next slide. The other thing I wanted to cover is the maintaining of records. So in code and rule, you are required to report certain information to us. And so this is the information that you have to maintain. Now, when a family applies for fee waivers, you do not keep that verification of income or being on SSI or state custody. That information, once you have verified and they are approved or denied, then you would shred that documentation of the income or the eligibility, but you would maintain a record of how many students you approved for fee waivers, how many who worked in lieu of a waiver. So if a student performs service and then you waive or credit those fees, that is considered a waived fee. You will also keep track of the dollar amount total that you waived. So the fees waived, including those that worked in lieu of waiver, and then the number of students that you denied fee waivers to. And so this is information that will be reported on the statistical report each October when we submit for that information. So you will need to have a process to track this information so we know how many students you are giving fee waivers for, how much of that the LEA is having to cover through the amount is waived, or there's, if you are having students that are working in lieu of waivers, there's other requirements. And so those that are using that, we will be reaching out to those LEAs if we have questions or concerns that come up with the amounts that are reported. And then we will be watching the number of students denied fee waivers as well. Any questions? Okay, then I will turn the time over to Barbie to go through the corrective action processes. You're muted, Barbie.
Oops. I think that's the new catchphrase. You're muted. How many times do we say that in a Zoom meeting? All right. If you want to give me the next slide, Charity, thank you. Technical guidance versus corrective action. What is the difference? So we're going to explain, how we determine if it's a technical guidance or elevated to a corrective action. Technical guidance is when we have a concern filed with the school fee team and the risk is just not high enough to warrant corrective action. The school fee team will reach out to the LEA via email to outline the concern and the requirements. You know what, that's the next screen, sorry. Can you give me the next slide, thank you. Okay. In this scenario, we receive a call from a parent or an email saying that there is an art teacher that has 3 cabinets of art supplies. The first cabinet is those who have not paid a fee. The second cabinet is for those who have not paid fee. The second cabinet is those at the time paid the fees at the time of registration, And the third is for students who want to purchase supplies from the teacher to get the best quality of work. So we get the complaint, the school fee team conducts a review, we look at all the documentation that is provided. In this case, the parent provided an email from the teacher. The letter requests funds for unpaid fees, which violates student confidentiality. Teachers are not on the need to know list. The teacher should not know whether or not a student has paid fees or not. And definitely not in a classroom where potentially another student would be aware of a peer's status. So we want to make sure that that's not happening. Student confidentiality is high. So the letter that gives the items available for purchase also violates that fees were not on an approved fee schedule. So in this particular case, the complaint is considered a high risk and corrective action would be warranted and issued. So if in this case, the teacher was just selling supplies, it would be considered a technical guidance because that can be easily corrected and wouldn't elevate to the corrective action. We felt that that would just be a technical guidance if it was just the fact that the fees hadn't been on the approved schedule. In that case, we would contact the LEA, have the teacher discontinuing charging of fees for supplies until the fees were reviewed and approved in a public meeting. But because of the confidentiality of the student, this would rise to the level of a corrective action. Next slide. So corrective action, when it is initiated and determined, a formal letter will go out that outlines the compliance issue and a corrective action steps, and it goes to the superintendent or charter director, the board chair, the LEA contact, charter authorizer if there is one, which in most cases would be this state charter school board, and the USBE superintendency. So now we're going to look at the letter. First letter, the LEA will have 15 days and it'll state that they have 15 days for an informal meeting with the school fees team. The informal meeting can be via phone, in person, or through email correspondence. Also, the informal meeting is not required. It is strictly for the LEA and the school fees team to come to an agreement to clarify the allegations and to address the details of the recommendation if needed. If the LEA feels that the recommendations are in line with what they feel like needs to be done, then they can just merely concur and send in the formal acknowledgement. The formal acknowledgement of the corrective action plan is due within 45 days of the receipt of the letter. And that's per code R277-407-16. So, I mean, these dates are very specific and are spelled out in code, or in rule. Next slide, we're going to look at this is the corrective action plan form. And in the case, the scenario, Wilson District in this art teacher supply cabinet, a corrective action letter would be sent. And you can see that there's the form that the area of non-compliance, the details of non-compliance, the art class supply fee assessed to students not listed on the approved fee schedule. And then it has the proposed action or the why and the how to fix it. So here we have discontinuing charging the fees until amount can be reviewed and considered for approval on the LEA fee schedule. 2 public meetings must be held to meet the fee schedule approval requirements, and then a date. This date in red at the top, that is the 45 days. So this is the date that the letter would be sent, and the 45 days is listed here in red. So an LEA, if they agree to the steps spelled out in the corrective action, can merely initial here and sign the form and send it back to the school fees team, formally acknowledging that they agree, they concur, and that the corrective action will be taken care of. So the remedy itself doesn't have to be completed in the 45 days. It is just that the acknowledgement is due within 45 days. Next slide, thank you. After we get the corrective action plan back, an acceptance letter is sent to the school by the school fees team to the LEA. That way everything is in writing, everything is agreed upon. There's the date of when the corrective action will be completed, expected date, and so that everybody is on the same page. So it's all in writing, no ambiguity, everybody realizes what is expected. Now, just so that you know, if an LEA does not respond to the first letter, then a second letter is issued. And the LEA has 30 days from the receipt of the second letter to send a formal acknowledgement, or within 15 days of the letter, request an appeal before the board. Now, if the LEA ignores the first letter, ignores the second letter, and doesn't request an appeal, then financial consequences are mandated by R277-407 16-7. So, I mean, that would be, you would totally have to ignore us and not respond for it to get to that point. But we know the school, the LEAs are very responsive, and we just rarely don't have that situation. We send out something and people respond immediately. So we don't ever see that that's going to be a big issue. We're not even going to get to second letter with you guys. We know that. So the school fee teams will monitor the plan and the recommendation. And we know some of the corrective actions may only happen once a year. So we're not going to be checking with you every 30 days and to see if you've completed it when we know it's not even, you're not going to do it for another 9 months. So we will make an effort to check in and to see if there's a status update, to see if there's something going on or if it's been completed. Once the corrective action is completed, we send out a corrective action closure form, and it will state the corrective action plan is considered closed. That means that we've received all the documentation and are satisfied that the issue has been resolved. So that's the corrective action process in a nutshell. So if you have questions on the dates or the form or anything, please let us know. Do we have any questions that you'd like to address now? Doesn't look like
I don't
it.
see any coming in with the chat, so.
Well, they just know that they're so good. There's just not going to be any. All right. Okay, we're turning the time back over to Charity to bring it on home, Charity.
Thanks, Barbie. I appreciate it. And if you guys have questions that come up, or as you're thinking about what we're talking about, feel free to put it in the chat, raise your hand, or just go ahead and ask the question. So this next part, I'm just going to be going over the upcoming requirements. And I know we've covered this. We try to cover this each time. And so we have the April 1st deadline. I know you are all very aware of this, have been working on it. Some of you have completed it, gotten your fee schedules approved, done the 2 public meetings. So thank you for being on top of this one. We appreciate all of your efforts to make sure that that is met. We will be doing a review once this date has passed, just to verify that all of those have been posted, they're on the websites, everything's been approved. The next one is due to last year, so the 2020 legislative session is the requirements with House Bill 80, and that is this July 1st, which is a one-time report. And so this is the difference between what the normal certificate of compliance is with the statistical report and this July 1st statistical report. The requirements would be that you have to provide a breakdown of the fees into the curricular, co-curricular, and extracurricular fees. And it's required that you submit that to us by July 1st. Because of that deadline, we will be starting the Qualtrics survey will be sent out May 15th, and we will collect that information through June 15th. For those that do not submit that information by June 15th, we will have 2 weeks to work with you to gather that information before the July 1st final deadline. And then on October 31st, we will send out the certificate of compliance again. And in that, we will just ask for any updates before we submit the final report to the legislature on that statistical data. You have a question. We still collect fees through the end of June. Are we just leaving those amounts off the report? If that is the case, work with us specifically. I know we have, the thing is we have to receive that information by July 1st. And so if you can have it that final day and have it to us by July 1st, then that is great. And so that's why we're sending out the Qualtrics survey ahead of time. But if you have concerns, then bring that to us. The report, so the statistical report for July 1st, yeah, the July report is for the school fees and fee waivers. You are sending in the tracking of the breakdown between we will ask for general, curricular, co-curricular, and extracurricular, how many fees were charged and collected and waived as well. And I actually, so my next slide will go through the specifics of that. So I will just move to that. So this will be on the slides posted on their website. So you guys will have these definitions. This is specifically what we are going to ask on the July 1st report. And these are the definitions. We will get these posted on the certificate of compliance tab on the website as well. But when the Qualtrics survey comes out, we will also have these definitions listed on there. So you will know exactly what we are looking for and how we are calculating this information. So I'm just going to walk through this step by step. If you have any questions, feel free to ask your questions or put them in the chat. So the first, we had some confusion on this last year, is the count of fees on the fee schedule. Sorry, I just saw a question come in. So the reporting of the approval of the fee schedule, what will happen is we will just go through and verify, because we can look on the public website where the meetings are held and verify that that was approved in the public meetings. And so the April 1st is a requirement with the rule that has to be met by that time. So the statistical report that I'm talking about right now for July 1st, this is what has been set in code. It is now 53G 5035 is the reference with that, but it appeared in the legislative session 2020 House Bill 80. And they stated that all LEAs must submit this information to the board on July 1st. And that was just for this year. So you were reporting this breakdown this one time, July 1st. From here on out, it will be October 31st that this information will be due. So what will happen though is if there are amounts that you are unable to report for this July 1st, we will ask for those updates in the October report when we send that out. We're hoping that there will just be a few LEAs that may run into that circumstance, but we understand that July 1st is a tough time. So we will ask to have as much as you can have reported by July 1st, and then reach out to you before we report this to the legislature in November. And that's when we are required to report that to them. Okay, so line D on this, count of fees on the fee schedule. There was some confusion as to what this meant. This specifically applies to how many fees are you charging on your fee schedule, not the total sum of the amount that you are asking. But if you charge a locker fee, that is considered one. A football fee is considered one. So a choir fee for the class or the art class, one. And so that would equal, you would have the football fee plus the locker fee would be 2 fees. So we want the total amount of fees that you are counting, the count of the number of fees on the fee schedule that you have listed there. The next is you also report the student maximum fee amount that you charge for students' participation in all courses, programs, and activities. So this is the maximum that we referred to in one of the graphs on the earlier slides. You will be reporting that, and that's the maximum. Now, there are numerous schools that do have that broken down into, hey, this is how much this is the maximum we charge for 6th grade. This is the maximum we charge for 7th. And you had several different maximums. What we want is the highest maximum amount that a student could be charged for that school year. And so when we ask that question on the statistical report, if you have a breakdown like that, then you will be just reporting that highest amount. So if the 9th grade is 500, 8th grade is 300, and 7th is 200, you would report that $500 amount as the maximum. And yes, the general fees category, we added that because there were a lot of LEAs that had fees that would not be classified as curricular, co-curricular, or extracurricular. And so that's where we are asking for this general category. If you are able to classify your fees into the other categories, please do that. Number of students within the report, we are looking for the number of students that you charged or assessed a fee to. So this is not your total student population. This is your secondary population, or any students that you are assessing a fee to. So in elementary, if you have an after-school program, that would include those students. Now, this also includes any students on fee waivers. So all students that would be assessed this fee or participating in those programs, this is that count. The grand total charge. So when we say charged, this is the total amount of all fees charged or assessed to all students for all categories. So you will combine the lines H plus I plus J plus K into this lump grand total. And this includes all amounts you receive that students pay, any that is credited for work in lieu, any fees waived, and make sure that this is every amount that you have assessed to a student. And then you have the breakdowns coming in for the general fees, the curricular fees, the co-curricular fees, and the extracurricular fees. And these are all regarding charged or assessed to the students. So these amounts, when we say charged general, that means all amounts charged in that general fees category, if you are using that, or the charged curricular, all fees, all total dollar amounts assessed to students for curricular fees. So this should include any amounts waived when we do that grand total. Okay, and it looks like Tammy, you're answering questions. Thank you. The next thing we'll ask for is money received. So in the code 53G-7-503-5, this is where they ask for the breakdown. So we will have a line item for the money received grand total. So this is amount that you collect from students that they have paid for school fees. And then we have the breakdown into the categories of general, curricular, co-curricular, and extracurricular fees. So that line L, the money received grand total, is M plus N plus O plus P. So your general plus your curricular plus your co-curricular plus your extracurricular. And then the number of students on fee waivers, again, this number does include all those that worked in lieu of fees. So you have all students that were granted a fee waiver or students who worked in lieu of fees. Please include that in the number of students on fee waivers. And then we have down into the waived grand total. So you have the total dollar amount of money waived for school fees, and this includes amounts credited as well. And that, so you would take and add your general category waived, waived curricular, waived co-curricular, waived extracurricular, and that should equal your waived grand total. And all of those would include those students when they had the amounts credited for work in lieu. All of these waived amounts include those amounts that are credited. And then we have a separate breakdown that is a subset of the number of students granted fee waivers that specifically asks for how many did you have that worked in lieu of fees, and provide the number of students that participated in that, how much was credited. So we do want a breakdown to classify those. And I know there's many LEAs that do not participate or have a work in lieu program. And so for us, we would review those because there are additional requirements for those that have worked in lieu that we would research and make sure that they are following those guidelines with this. The last one on the list is the number of students denied fee waivers. So all students who applied and were denied fee waivers. Looks like we've got a couple of questions that have been coming in. Do we need to go back and break out the general fees now for the July 1st report? If you have not tracked that and you can classify them with curricular, co-curricular, and extracurricular, no, you do not need to. Do we need to have our boards approve the classification of fees again with the addition of general fees? Go ahead, Tammy.
The general fee is kind of a catch-all after the fact. We'd much rather have them all in the curricular, co-curricular, and extracurricular. But so if you've got those three categories, that's good enough. That'll include it all. Basically what we do when we report, we'll take the general and add it to the curricular, because that is, you know, part of delivering the school day activities. But some people wanted to look at that a little differently and separately, and thought, okay, we can add one more account. But so in general, that general fee is going to be added to the curricular account. As for an example of a co-curricular, those are hard to come by.
I have a good one, Tammy.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so any co-curriculars, anything tied to a curricular class. So for example, if you have a choir class and students are attending that, any activity outside of that that is tied to choir would be considered a co-curricular activity. You can take that down to robotics as well. So if you have a robotics class and you have a robotics club, that is a co-curricular robotics club, and would be classified under that category. The definitions of those are spelled out in 53G-7-501, and they break down the curricular versus co-curricular and extracurricular. So you can look those up on the website for the Utah code.
Charity,
Yes.
I have a question on the count the number of individual fees on the fee schedule, and I apologize if I'm the only one struggling with this, but if
Okay.
do we say basketball is one fee, or do we look at the spend plan and say, oh, they're also charging for, or they've got to charge for travel, they got to charge for meals, they've got their spirit pack, they're charging for this. So when you break down their fees within basketball, you might come up with 7. Is that 7 fees, or is that one basketball fee?
If it's listed on your fee schedule as one fee, but then there's that detail broken down, it's one fee. Because what this is a control number. We found out that first year we were getting these fee schedules, but we were only getting the first page or a second page, and there were all these other pages missing. So it's just a control number for us as we look at the fee schedules and the data that we have this. We know if we got the whole thing or if we just got part of it. So I would just, every fee that's listed, that would be listed on a statement for someone to collect separately from the others, that is a fee. Does that make sense?
It does. We hand all of our parents a spend plan that shows them everything that they possibly
Yeah,
could charge
right.
for. But there is a grand amount at the bottom. So I guess that's one fee. That's what we'll go by.
Yeah, but not one grand total for the student, but like one, we'll have basketball, you know.
Yeah.
Am I
If you're
thinking
playing
that right? Okay,
basketball, you're
all
going
right.
to get, if you play basketball, you're going to get one document that shows you all the fees that could possibly be charged
Right.
in one lump sum. But I'm just trying to say within that document, there's multiple charges, but if I'm hearing you right, I'm going to count that as one fee.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so we've got some other questions that have come in here. Let me go back up. Okay, so from Beverly, Chris Titus, CTSOs. I'm not aware of that abbreviation. I apologize.
Career and Technical Student Organization.
Okay, then yes, if it's tied to a class, then it would be considered co-curricular. And then we have Beverly, if your fee schedule did not change from last year, do we still need public comment and board approval? Yes, you need to make sure that your fee schedules have 2 public meetings every year and are approved by the board every year by April 1st. That is a requirement in R277407-6 that these need to occur on an annual basis, regardless of whether you made changes or not. The definition of doesn't the definition of co-curricular state that the class is required? Just not just that you have a class associated with the activity, the class has to actually be required in order to participate. So I am going to read the specifics of 53G-7-501 for co-curricular. Okay, so this is co-curricular activity means an activity, a course, or a program that A, is an extension of a curricular activity, B, is included in an instructional plan and supervised or conducted by a teacher or education professional, C, is conducted outside of regular school hours, D, is provided, sponsored, or supported by an LEA, and E, includes a required regular school day activity, course, or program. So with this required, if they have to, in order to participate, if there is a class that they have to attend in order to be a part of this program, that is considered co-curricular. So in order to be a part of a robotics club, you have to attend the robotics class. That club is considered co-curricular. And let's see. Yes, on the next one, if we have a robotics class, but it does not have anything to do with our robotics after school program, so would our after school be classified an extracurricular fee? Yes, that is where it is. So if they are not required to attend that class to be a part of that program, then it is considered extracurricular. Correct. General fee, an example, some of the ones that have come up is a locker fee or a parking fee. I'm trying to think if there's any others. Those are the ones that come to mind that have been asked that we have had a lot of questions on, that you can't tie it to a class or a program, or it's not an after school, but those have been classified as general fees. And yes, you can just put them in with the curricular. That would be fine. And thank you, Tammy. If it is during school time, it is considered co-curricular. Yes, you guys are great. You're catching on. You're getting this. So yay. Any other questions regarding these?
Hey, Charity, this is Mike with Cash District.
Hi, Mike.
Can you help a little bit with the maximum per student?
Yes.
Just to help on that, because that can be such a large fluctuation. Because I want to be sure I'm reporting this the right way. Because depending on the grade level you're in, it could really change. For example, 9th grade could be taking driver's ed, which is a fee that 10th, 11th, and 12th graders won't take. But how do we put all that together? Is it every class, say for example, a junior, every class that they could possibly take and every activity that they could possibly take? Is that what figured into a maximum? Or what's the best way to figure the maximum?
Okay, these are great questions. Love them. Thank you, Mike. With the maximum amount, it is you are looking at what a student can participate. Now, there are some regulations or some protections for you as an LEA, because we've had, when we did our spend plan group, there were questions as to, okay, what's stopping a student from participating in 10, additional activities where they have football and wrestling and there's massive amounts. So there is some protection there for you where you can set in your policies the maximum amount of number that a student can participate in that would be covered under this maximum amount. And so if you go in and say, hey, a student can participate in a maximum of 3 or 4 extracurricular activities that would be covered by the school. And then if they participate in more than that, then that maximum amount, once they reach that, and then if their maximum amount within the 4 activities is still under your maximum that you sent, then you are fine. If they have only participated in 3 activities and they reach that maximum amount and participate in a 4th, that 4th activity would be covered by the school because they have reached that maximum amount. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's just a tough one to answer.
It is. There's a lot of little intricacies with this, but yes, we are looking at you know, everything that a student would be participating in with their courses, programs, and activities. But there's some protection for you within the rule as well. And the majority of that is found in that R277407-6, where it addresses the maximum amounts. Any other questions? Okay, slower. So you have the two codes. So the Utah code 53G-7-503. So it's here on the side as well. And then R277-407-6 is where you're going to find a lot of the fee schedule requirements, maximum amounts is in that section 6 of R277-407. Any further questions regarding these? Okay, I will move on to current requirements that are in place and then upcoming ones according to code and rule. And so these are just things that I'm sure you're aware of currently that are in January 2020 when R277 became fully into effect. That's where a lot of these came into place. And so the first one was the LEAs cannot use revenue collected through fees to offset the cost of fee waivers. An LEA shall establish a spend plan for each fee charged and share revenue lost due to fee waivers across the LEA. So this one is kind of two parts right here. A lot of you are already doing spend plans and have processes to share the revenue lost due to fee waivers. An LEA that has multiple schools shall establish a procedure to identify and address potential inequities due to the impact of fee waivers. So those two kind of tie together as well. Just making sure that there's not one school that is carrying the burden of fee waivers within an LEA, and making sure that the LEA is addressing that. And then this last one is an LEA may not impose an additional fee or increase a fee to supplant or subsidize another fee. So those are all the ones that are currently in place. And then these were the ones that would be in effect this next school year. This first one, that fees must be equal or less than the cost of the activity. In this last legislative session, it was delayed due to Senate Bill 178 until the 22-23 school year. And so we just wanted to let you know that that has been delayed because of Senate Bill 178. The other one that we wanted to make you aware of was currently in discussion in Finance Committee this morning, and this dealt with the requirement in R277-113 of accruing school fee waivers and using contra revenue accounts. This in red right here is the recommendation that has been presented to Finance Committee. There was no action on that today. It was a discussion, and there were a number of VAs that spoke at that. And so you will be hearing more on this requirement as that is reviewed by the board in the upcoming months. So we will notify you that, and we will probably, if a decision has been reached by our next newsletter, which is scheduled to be sent to you in May, then we will have an update for you with that newsletter. The final upcoming requirement for the 22-23 school year is regarding the textbooks. One thing we wanted to point out here is you cannot charge a fee for a textbook. Textbook is being defined as anything that is required for a student to participate in that course. So if you have students that are in digital material through a laptop and you have been purchasing those laptops, you cannot charge a fee for those laptops beginning with the 22-23 school year. Any questions on these requirements? Concurrent enrollment. So the question was, does that include concurrent enrollment? There is a document on our website regarding concurrent enrollment. You can charge a fee for AP and concurrent enrollment textbooks. However, that fee equates to the amount that Okay, let me back up a bit. You can charge a fee for that even when this regulation is in place. However, if a student is on fee waivers, you have to waive that fee for the textbook. Now, for charging for the AP and the concurrent enrollment classes, the way that it's set up is if there's the fee from the university or from the college that the course is being sent through, and so that fee cannot be waived and you still have to charge. But if there is an amount in addition to that, above and beyond what the school or the college is charging, those are the amounts that must be waived for those on fee waivers. Did that answer your question? Okay, perfect. And any other questions? Okay, well, that sums up our training for today. We'll just jump right into our question answer session. And so all three of us are here and available. It looks like Jason Stinger asked another question. What if a laptop is instructional equipment? So those are specifically drawn out in rule and code. So if you look at the definitions for rule, it will classify what is covered under a textbook and what is considered instructional material. And so that's where you have to go through those with your LEA and make sure that if you are considering it instructional material, it falls underneath that definition. And I'm going to pull up right now the definition of textbook. So R277 407-2 and 24 is where it talks about the definition of textbook. And it says it includes a hard copy or printed pages of instructional material, including a consumable workbook, computer hardware, software, or digital content, and the maintenance costs of school equipment. Textbook does not include instructional equipment or instructional supplies. Okay, so this is where we turn it over to you guys. If you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat or go ahead and unmute your mics. Okay, and then thank you, Tammy, for adding comments there. Maybe I can go to definitions of instructional equipment versus instructional supplies versus book. So when we talk about instructional equipment, I want you to think of a class where you have an item that they're using in addition to like a textbook. So you have the examples that they give in rule is you have a camera for your photography class. So that's an additional item that they're using in addition to their coursework that they're accessing online, or their workbook, or a band instrument, or a stethoscope in a medical class. And so those would fall under instructional equipment. So if the laptop is being used to provide that course curriculum, that would fall under a textbook. Instructional supply, if we're looking at that, that is something that would be considered the brushes in an art class, or wood for word shop. So a consumable item is considered an instructional supply. And again, the laptop would not fall under that. So the recording will be posted on the website. I would say give us about a week and a half to get this posted, but that will be available for you to watch and receive and use in training, as well as we will have a PDF of this presentation as well posted on the website, so you can access the slides with the comments that we have made prior to this posted on there as well. Any other questions? Okay, well, we thank you all for attending today. We appreciate your great questions and your feedback regarding this. If you have specific concerns for your LEA regarding the annual reports, please reach out to us via the school fees email, and we will set up a time to meet with you and go over those specific questions that you have for your LEA. Thank you so much for your time today. And if nobody else has any questions, we will go ahead and end the training.